When 29-year-old Nora Whitmore arrived at the elegant lakeside lodge for her brother's engagement celebration, she expected champagne, family photographs, and perhaps one awkward speech from her uncle. But she never imagined that the evening would end with her entire family trying to take away the one place where she had finally built a life of her own. Instead of celebrating the upcoming wedding, her Aunt Celeste suddenly announced in front of nearly 40 relatives that Nora's restored farmhouse in Vermont would be given to her younger cousin Lily, claiming that Lily needed a fresh start and that Nora had more than enough opportunities already. Nora stared across the candlelit table as Lily lowered her eyes with practiced sadness, while several relatives nodded sympathetically, and Celeste smiled as though she had just presented the family with a generous solution rather than publicly declaring ownership over something that had never belonged to her. The farmhouse had not been a handout from Nora's family, and its history was far more complicated than anyone at that table realized because 5 years earlier, after working 2 jobs and saving nearly every dollar she earned, Nora had purchased the neglected property and spent years restoring its cracked windows, collapsing porch, and overgrown gardens with her own hands. She had transformed the abandoned house into a quiet retreat where she could paint, write, and escape the endless expectations of relatives who always seemed to need something from her. So when Celeste announced that Lily would move into it after the wedding, Nora calmly asked, "Exactly when did you decide that my house became a family asset?" And the sudden silence that followed told her that the conversation had been rehearsed long before she ever entered the room. Her cousin Lily immediately began crying, explaining that she had struggled to find affordable housing and that Nora was luckier than most. But Nora noticed something strange when Lily reached into her purse and pulled out a folder containing photographs of the farmhouse, estimated renovation costs, and even a proposed moving schedule that began 3 weeks after the wedding. Nora felt the shock inside her slowly turn into something colder as she realized this was not an emotional request made during dinner, but a plan that had already been organized down to the smallest detail. And when she looked toward her Uncle Marcus, the man who had taught her how to repair a leaking roof, he suddenly looked away as if the floor had become more interesting than the betrayal unfolding around him. Then Nora's longtime friend Daniel, who had accompanied her to the celebration, leaned toward her and quietly asked, "Did you ever show them the original purchase agreement?" And Nora shook her head because she had never imagined she would need to prove ownership of a property she had personally bought, maintained, insured, and paid taxes on for years. Daniel's question planted an idea, and while Celeste continued explaining that family should never be selfish with resources, Nora opened the secure folder on her phone where she kept copies of every deed, receipt, tax statement, contractor invoice, and bank record connected to the farmhouse, discovering in the process that someone had recently attempted to access the property's insurance account using information that only a handful of relatives could have known. Nora excused herself from the table and walked into the lodge's quiet library, where snow tapped softly against the tall windows and the sound of the celebration faded behind heavy wooden doors. Then she called the attorney who had handled her property purchase and asked one simple question. "Has anyone contacted you about transferring or placing a claim against my farmhouse?" The attorney paused before answering that someone had indeed called his office 2 weeks earlier pretending to be a relative authorized to discuss the property. But because the caller could not provide the required verification information, he had refused to release anything, and Nora suddenly understood why her aunt had been so confident that she would surrender quietly. When Nora returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had changed because Daniel had quietly informed the lodge manager that Nora needed privacy, and several relatives were now watching her with nervous curiosity instead of sympathy. Celeste raised an eyebrow and asked whether Nora had come to her senses, but Nora placed her phone on the table and said, "No, I came back with documents," before showing everyone the purchase records, property tax history, and attorney's statement, and the room became so quiet that the crackle of the fireplace sounded deafening. Lily's expression changed first, because the helpless tears disappeared and were replaced by genuine fear, when Nora revealed that the proposed moving schedule had been created before anyone had even asked her permission, while Celeste insisted that the family had only been trying to help and accused Nora of humiliating them. Nora finally answered, "You didn't ask me for help, you planned around my answer." And then she explained that the farmhouse represented years of sacrifice, not spare wealth, before revealing the attempted insurance account access and asking everyone at the table who had authorized it. No one answered, but Uncle Marcus finally stood and admitted that Celeste had asked him several weeks earlier to photograph the farmhouse interior because Lily wanted to know whether her furniture would fit, and his confession shattered the last excuse that this had been an innocent misunderstanding. Celeste became furious and accused Marcus of betraying the family, yet Nora interrupted her and said, "The betrayal happened when you decided my kindness was a weakness." Then she gathered her documents, thanked the relatives who had remained silent because they were too uncomfortable to take sides, and walked outside into the freezing night with Daniel beside her. The following morning, Nora drove back to the farmhouse before sunrise and found the first light spilling across the snow-covered fields. But instead of feeling afraid, she felt strangely peaceful because she finally understood that protecting herself did not make her cruel, and that saying no to people who had grown accustomed to her sacrifices was not the same thing as abandoning them. She changed the property's security codes, contacted her attorney about additional protections, canceled the family access arrangements she had once allowed out of goodwill, and placed the old spare keys in a small envelope marked "Not Yours," while Daniel watched from the porch and said, "You don't have to prove you're a good person by letting people hurt you." Months later, Nora hosted a small gathering at the farmhouse with the people who had supported her without demanding anything in return. And as laughter filled the rooms she had rebuilt with her own hands, she realized that the greatest thing she had recovered was not the property itself, but the freedom to decide what happened to her life. Celeste eventually sent a long apology. Lily moved into an apartment she could afford with help from a legitimate housing program, and Nora chose forgiveness without reopening the door to the old pattern, because she had finally learned that family can be loved deeply while boundaries are still kept firmly. And if this story reminded you that protecting your peace is not selfish, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.